You think you know what silence sounds like. You don't. Not until you've sat in the sterile, freezing air of family court, watching the man you promised your life to, holding hands with the woman who destroyed it. That was the silence Sarah faced. She walked in, wearing a thrift store coat, clutching two 5-month-old twins, looking like she had already lost. Her husband David and his mistress Jessica laughed at her from the defense table. They thought it was over. They thought money could buy everything, including the truth. But they forgot one thing Judge Arthur Halloway doesn't like: bullies. And the secret he was about to read from a sealed envelope wouldn't just end the marriage, it would shatter their entire reality. Watch until the end, because when the mistress realizes what she actually won, you won't believe her reaction. The rain in Seattle that morning wasn't just rain. It was a deluge, the kind that soaks through your bones and makes you question why you even bothered getting out of bed. For Sarah Miller, staying in bed wasn't an option. It hadn't been an option for 6 months, ever since David had kicked her out of their sprawling lakeside estate in Bellevue. She stood at the bus stop on 4th Avenue, shielding the double stroller with her body. The plastic rain cover on the stroller was fogged up with the breath of Leo and Sam, her 5-month-old twin boys. They were sleeping now, mercifully, but Sarah knew that was a ticking time bomb. She looked down at her outfit. It was her best suit, but best was a relative term. It was a charcoal grey ensemble she'd bought at a Goodwill in Renton 3 years ago. It was slightly tight around the shoulders and loose at the waist, a remnant of a body that had changed after carrying twins. Her shoes were scuffed black flats because she couldn't afford heels, and honestly she couldn't carry 2 babies in car seats while wearing stilettos. "Please just let us get there dry," she whispered to no one in particular. A sleek black Mercedes splashed a wave of dirty gutter water onto the curb just inches from her feet. Sarah flinched, pulling the stroller back. As the car idled at the red light, she saw the personalized license plate, D&J East. David and Jessica. Estate. Her stomach turned over. It was them. David was driving, looking immaculate in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Sarah's entire year of rent in the studio apartment she was currently sharing with cockroaches. In the passenger seat sat Jessica Banks. Jessica was 24, a former fitness influencer turned lifestyle consultant, whatever that meant. She was beautiful undeniably. Blonde hair blown out to perfection, lips glossy, wearing a cream-colored trench coat that looked like it was made of butter. She was laughing, her head thrown back, tapping David playfully on the shoulder. They looked like royalty. They looked like winners. Sarah looked down at her twins. Leo stirred, letting out a small whimper. "It's okay," she soothed, rocking the stroller. "Mummy's here." The light turned green, and the Mercedes roared away, leaving Sarah in a cloud of exhaust. David Miller was a tech consultant, or at least that's what he told people. He was charming, aggressive, and had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room until he decided you were furniture. When Sarah met him 7 years ago, he was ambitious but broke. She had supported him working double shifts at a diner, editing his proposals, and practically managing his life. When his firm finally took off, she thought they had made it. Then came the money. Then came the late nights. Then came Jessica. When Sarah got pregnant with the twins after years of IVF struggles, David didn't cry with joy. He asked how much the hospital bill would be. When the boys were born, he wasn't there. He was at a conference in Miami. And then the day she came home from the hospital, the locks were changed. A process server was waiting on the porch with a dissolution of marriage packet and a temporary restraining order, claiming Sarah was mentally unstable due to postpartum hormones and a danger to the household. He had frozen the accounts. He had taken the car. He had left her with nothing but a diaper bag and a bus pass. The bus finally arrived, screeching to a halt. Sarah struggled to collapse the heavy double stroller while holding 2 infants, the driver tapping his watch impatiently. "Move it along, lady people got places to be," the driver grumbled. "I'm sorry, I'm trying." Sarah gasped, hoisting the heavy frame onto the bus. She moved to the back, collapsing into a plastic seat, breathless. She checked her phone. 8:45 a.m. The hearing was at 9:00 a.m. This was the final hearing. The hearing where David's lawyer, a shark named Richard Sterling, had promised to obliterate her claims for alimony and take full custody of the boys, leaving Sarah with nothing. She had no lawyer. She had made too much money last year, technically, as she was joint on David's tax returns to qualify for legal aid, but currently had zero access to funds to hire private counsel. She was representing herself. Pro se, that's what they called it. Alone is what it felt like. The fluorescent lights of the King County Superior Court hallway hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. Sarah pushed the stroller out of the elevator, her hair frizzy from the humidity, her coat damp. She saw them immediately. David and Jessica were standing near the water fountain, flanked by Richard Sterling. Sterling was a short man, with a loud voice and a suit that looked sharper than a razor blade. He was laughing at something Jessica said. Jessica spotted Sarah first. Her smile didn't drop. It just changed. It shifted from genuine amusement to a pitying sneer. She nudged David. David turned. His eyes raked over Sarah from her damp hair to her scuffed shoes. He didn't look at the stroller. He didn't look at his sons. "You actually showed up," David said, his voice carrying down the hall. "I thought you'd have the decency to sign the settlement and spare us the drama." "I'm not signing anything that gives you full custody, David," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly, but her grip on the stroller handle iron tight. "They're babies. They need their mother. They need a stable environment," Jessica chimed in. Her voice was high and melodic, like a cartoon princess. "Not a studio apartment in, where is it? White Center. It smells like mildew just looking at you." "Jessica, don't speak to me," Sarah said. "She's right, though," David said, checking his Rolex. "Sarah, look at you. You're a mess. You can't support them. I'm offering you a clean break. $10,000 cash one time. You walk away. Jessica and I will raise the boys. We have the nanny already hired, a British woman, very qualified. You think you can buy my children for $10,000? Sarah felt bile rising in her throat. "I think I'm being generous," David scoffed, "considering you brought nothing to this marriage but debt and complaints. Mr. Miller." Sterling, the lawyer, stepped in, placing a hand on David's shoulder. "Save it for the judge. Let's not give her anything to use." He turned to Sarah, his eyes cold and dead. "Mrs. Miller, I hope you brought your exhibits. Judge Holloway is a stickler for paperwork." Sarah clutched her battered tote bag. Inside was a mess of bank statements. She couldn't decipher photos of David's car at Jessica's condo and a handwritten timeline of her contributions to the company. It felt pathetic compared to the 3 leather-bound binders Sterling was holding. "All rise!" the bailiff shouted from inside the courtroom. They filed in. The room was mostly empty, save for a few bored clerks. Judge Arthur Halloway took the bench. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, with thick reading glasses perched on a nose that looked like it had been broken a few times. He was known as Hardline Halloway. He didn't care about sob stories. He cared about statutes and evidence. Sarah's heart sank. She needed a human, and she got a machine. Case number 24, 098 Miller versus Miller, the clerk announced. Appearances. Halloway grunted, not looking up from his file. Richard Sterling for the petitioner Hivid Miller, Sterling announced smoothly. And we are joined by Ms. Jessica Banks, a supportive partner and witness to the household environment. And for the respondent, Halloway looked at the empty table where Sarah sat. Sarah Miller. She stood up. Representing myself, Your Honor. Halloway peered over his glasses. Pro se. In a high-asset divorce with custody dispute. Mrs. Miller, are you sure that's wise? I have no choice, Your Honor. My husband froze our assets. I cannot afford. Counsel. Objection, Sterling shot up. Mr. Miller secured the accounts to prevent Mrs. Miller from draining them during her episodes. We have authorized a stipend for her which she refused. A stipend, Sarah blurted out. He offered me $200 a week. Diapers alone cost that much. Order. Halloway banged the gavel lightly. Mrs. Miller, you will speak when addressed. Mr. Sterling, you will lower your volume. Let's proceed. Petitioner's opening. Sterling walked to the center of the room. He didn't use notes. He was performing. Your Honor. This is a simple case of tragedy. David Miller is a successful businessman who built an empire from scratch. He has provided a life of luxury for his wife. But tragically, Mrs. Miller has succumbed to severe mental strain. She is erratic, unemployable, and currently living in poverty by choice. We are asking for full legal and physical custody of the twins Leo and Sam to be placed with the father where they will have a stable home, a dedicated nanny, and the love of Mr. Miller and his fiancée, Ms. Banks. We also ask that spousal support be denied as the prenuptial agreement. Exhibit A clearly states that in the event of infidelity, support is void. Sarah gasped. Infidelity? I never cheated. We have witnesses who say otherwise. Sterling smiled thinly. The witness was Jessica Banks. Sarah watched in horror as Jessica took the stand. She had taken off her trench coat to reveal a modest conservative dress. She looked like the picture of innocence. Miss Banks, Sterling asked, pacing in front of her. Describe your relationship with Mr. Miller. We met strictly professionally. Jessica lied effortlessly. I was consulting on wellness for his employees, but I saw how sad he was. He would come to work with unironed shirts, looking exhausted. He told me his wife refused to do anything around the house. Sarah gripped the edge of her table. She had spent those years doing David's accounting, cleaning his office, and cooking his meals while undergoing hormone injections for IVF. And did you ever witness Mrs. Miller's behavior? Yes. Jessica nodded, looking at the judge with wide, sad eyes. I went to their house once to drop off some paperwork. Mrs. Miller was screaming. She was throwing things at David. She looked deranged, and I saw a man leaving the back door. A man? Sterling raised an eyebrow. Yes, a tall man. I didn't know who he was, but David told me later that Sarah had been meeting strangers online. Liar, Sarah shouted, standing up. That is a lie. The only man at the house was the plumber. Sit down, Mrs. Miller, Judge Halloway barked. One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Sarah collapsed back into her chair, tears stinging her eyes. She looked at David. He was smirking. He wasn't even looking at her. He was sketching something on a notepad. "Ms. Banks," Sterling continued, "how is your relationship with the twins?" "Oh, I love them." Jessica beamed. "I've already decorated a nursery for them at our penthouse. It has organic cotton bedding, a state-of-the-art monitoring system, and a view of the city. I just want to be the mother they deserve. A mother who can actually provide for them." She looked directly at Sarah then. It was a look of pure triumph. "I have your husband, I have your money, and soon I will have your children." Judge Holloway was taking notes furiously. He didn't look happy. "Cross-examination?" Holloway asked, looking at Sarah. Sarah stood up. Her legs felt like jelly. She walked to the podium. She had watched videos on how to do this, but her mind was blank. "Ms. Banks," Sarah stammered. You said you met David professionally. But isn't it true that your consulting firm was registered only 2 weeks ago, and before that you were working as a bottle service waitress at Club Vibe, where David was a VIP regular?" Sterling stood up. "Objection, relevance, and attacking the witness's character." "It goes to credibility, Your Honor," Sarah said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Overruled," Holloway said. "Answer the question." Jessica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "I worked in hospitality." "Yes. That's where I learned people skills, something you clearly lack." "And the nursery?" Sarah continued, her anger fueling her. "You said you have a nursery ready, but David just said in his financial disclosure that he is currently renting that penthouse. If he loses this case, he has no assets. How will you pay for that nursery?" Jessica laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Honey, David isn't going to lose. And even if he did, we have resources you couldn't dream of. David is a genius. He built that company. You just rode his coattails." "No further questions," Sarah whispered. She sat down. She felt like she had failed. She hadn't exposed the affair properly. She hadn't proven the lies. "Mr. Sterling, call your next witness," Holloway said. "We rest your honor. The facts speak for themselves. The prenup is clear. The mother is unstable. The father is capable." Holloway turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Miller, your case." Sarah stood up. She picked up her messy stack of papers. She didn't have witnesses. She didn't have a shark lawyer. I would like to testify," she said. She took the stand. She told the truth. She talked about the years of support. She talked about how David had transferred the company assets into shell corporations the moment she got pregnant. She talked about the twins. "I don't have money," Sarah said, looking at the judge. "I don't have a penthouse. But I have been there every single night when they cry. I know that Leo likes to be held on the left side, and Sam needs his back rubbed to fall asleep. David doesn't even know their middle names. Jessica thinks they are accessories for her Instagram. Please, Your Honor, don't take my babies." David rolled his eyes audibly. Judge Holloway stared at Sarah for a long moment. Then he looked at David. Then he looked at the file on his desk. "Is that all, Mrs. Miller?" "Yes, Your Honor." Holloway closed the file. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The room was silent. The only sound was the radiator clanking and the soft breathing of the twins in the back of the room, where the bailiff was watching them. "This is a complex case," Holloway began, his voice low and gravelly. "Usually I would take a few days to issue a ruling." David leaned over to Jessica and whispered, "We got it. He's going to rule later to save her the embarrassment in person." However, Holloway continued, his eyes snapping open and locking on to David. There are certain discrepancies in the financial affidavits provided by Mr. Miller that require immediate attention. Sterling shifted uncomfortably. Discrepancies, Your Honor. It's standard accounting. It is not standard, Holloway said, reaching under his bench. He pulled out a large, thick manila envelope. It was sealed with red tape. This morning at 8:00 a.m., my chambers received a courier package from the State Department of Revenue and the executor of the estate of one Archibald Vance. Sarah froze. Archibald Vance was her grandfather. He had died 10 years ago, leaving nothing but debt. Or so she thought. David's face went pale. Jessica looked confused. "Who is Archibald Vance?" she whispered. "Shut up," David hissed, sweat suddenly beading on his forehead. "Mrs. Miller," Judge Holloway said, his voice softening. "Did you know your grandfather had a blind trust?" "No." Sarah shook her head. "He died broke." "He did not die broke," Holloway said, opening the envelope. The sound of tearing paper echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "He was the silent partner in a mining patent that was sold 3 months ago. The trust explicitly states that the funds were to be released solely to his granddaughter, Sarah Miller, upon the birth of her first child." Holloway pulled out a document. "Mr. Miller." Holloway turned his gaze to David. It was a look of pure predatory focus. "You knew about this trust, didn't you? In fact, looking at these bank transfers, it appears you tried to access it using a forged power of attorney 6 months ago, the exact same week you filed for divorce." The silence in the courtroom was shattered by the sound of Richard Sterling David's high-priced shark of a lawyer snapping his briefcase shut. It was a subtle sound, but it signaled a massive shift in the atmosphere. "Mr. Miller," Judge Holloway said, his voice dangerously calm. "I asked you a question. You attempted to access the Archibald Vance Trust 6 months ago using a power of attorney document, a document that the estate executors claim is a forgery. Is that correct?" David stood up. His legs were shaking so badly the table vibrated. The arrogant, untouchable tech CEO was gone. In his place was a terrified man caught in a lie he couldn't buy his way out of. "Your Honor, there must be a mistake," David stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "I was merely trying to manage the family finances." Sarah was overwhelmed with the pregnancy. She wasn't thinking straight. I was acting in her best interest by trying to route the funds into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, registered to D&J Holdings, Holloway asked, holding up another sheet of paper, an account that lists Ms. Jessica Banks as the secondary beneficiary. The air left the room. Sarah turned to look at Jessica. Jessica's mouth had fallen open. She wasn't looking at Sarah. She was staring at David with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "David," Jessica whispered, her voice shrill, "you told me that money was from your software patent. You told me you earned that money." "Quiet, Jessica." David snapped his veneer, cracking completely. He turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, this is all speculation. That trust it's irrelevant to the custody hearing. I am the primary earner. I have the house. I have the nanny. Sarah has nothing." "Sarah has $18 million, Judge Holloway corrected him loud and clear. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. "Excuse me," Sarah whispered, clutching the edge of the podium. She felt lightheaded. 18 million. Actually, with the accumulated interest and the final sale of the patent rights. Holloway adjusted his glasses, reading the fine print. The total deposit made to the trust account yesterday was $24,300,000. And since this inheritance was left specifically to you, Sarah, and explicitly excluded from marital property in the trust's founding documents, Mr. Miller cannot touch a cent of it. It is entirely yours. David looked like he was going to vomit. His face turned a shade of gray that matched the courtroom floor. 24 million, Jessica breathed out. Her eyes dilated. She looked at David, then at Sarah. The gears in her head were turning so fast you could almost hear them grinding. Furthermore, Holloway continued, leaning forward, because Mr. Miller attempted to access these funds fraudulently, and because he hid this asset during the discovery phase of this divorce, he has committed perjury and fraud. Sterling, the lawyer, stood up abruptly. He smoothed his suit jacket and looked at the judge with a practiced, neutral expression. Your Honor, Sterling said coolly, in light of this new evidence which my client failed to disclose to me, I must request a recess to discuss matters with my client, or alternatively, I may need to file a motion to withdraw as counsel. You're firing me, David screamed, spinning on his lawyer. I pay you $500 an hour. You can't quit. I am an officer of the court, Mr. Miller. Sterling said, his voice icy. I cannot knowingly suborn perjury. You told me your wife was destitute. You told me there were no other assets. You lied to the court, and worse, you lied to me. Sit down, Mr. Miller. Holloway banged the gavel hard. There will be no recess. We are finishing this today. I have heard enough about your financial status. Now I want to hear about the stable home you promised these children. David sank into his chair. He looked small, but he wasn't done. He was a narcissist, and narcissists never go down without trying to drag everyone else with them. She's still unfit, David shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. Money doesn't make her a good mother. She's crazy. Jessica saw her. Jessica saw the man she was with. Jessica, tell him. He looked desperately at his mistress. He needed her to back up his lies. He needed her to save him. But Jessica Banks was looking at Sarah Miller. She was looking at the woman she had sneered at, the woman she had called mildew just an hour ago. And she was doing the math. David was about to be investigated for fraud. His assets were likely frozen. He was going to lose the lawsuit. Sarah was worth $24 million. Jessica stood up. Mr. Banks, Judge Holloway said, eyeing her suspiciously. You have something to add? Jessica took a deep breath. She smoothed her dress. She walked toward the witness stand, but she didn't look at David. She looked straight at Sarah, putting on her most sympathetic, teary-eyed face. Your Honor, Jessica said, her voice trembling with what sounded like manufactured emotion. I need to correct the record. Jessica, what are you doing? David hissed. I was lied to, Jessica said loudly, turning to face the judge. David told me Sarah was abusive. He told me she was neglecting the children. He showed me photos of a messy house and told me she did that. But I never actually saw her hit him. I never saw a man at the house. What? David shrieked. You testified 5 minutes ago. You said you saw a man. I was scared. Jessica sobbed, a single perfect tear rolling down her cheek. David is controlling, Your Honor. He made me say it. He told me if I did not back him up, he would kick me out of the apartment. I'm a victim here, too. He manipulated me, just like he manipulated Sarah. The courtroom erupted. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his belt. Sarah watched in stunned silence. It was like watching a snake shed its skin in real time. "You are lying." David slammed his fist on the table. "We rehearsed this. You wrote the script, Jessica. You said we needed to paint her as unstable to get the kids. Why would I want your kids?" "David," Jessica snapped, dropping the victim act for a split second, her true venom showing. "I'm 24. I don't want to raise twins. I wanted us to be happy." She caught herself and looked back at the judge, softening her face again. I thought we were building a family. But now I see the truth. Sarah is a good mother. I've seen her at the park. She loves those boys. I shouldn't have come between them." She turned to Sarah, clasping her hands together. "Sarah," Jessica pleaded, ignoring David completely. "I am so sorry. I didn't know about the money. The trust I didn't know he was stealing from you. If I had known, I never would have dated him. We women have to stick together, right?" Sarah stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. Jessica wasn't apologizing. She was auditing. She realized David was a sinking ship and was trying to hop onto Sarah's yacht before it left the harbor. Sarah slowly walked back to the microphone. She looked at David, who was purple with rage, and then at Jessica, who looked like a desperate puppy. "Ms. Banks," Sarah said, her voice quiet but steady. "You are wearing a diamond bracelet." Jessica blinked, confused by the change of subject. "What?" "The bracelet," Sarah pointed. "David bought it for you in December. I saw the charge on the credit card statement. It cost $8,000. That was the same week he told me we couldn't afford a heater for the nursery. That was the week my sons were sleeping in coats because the house was 50 degrees. Jessica covered her wrist instinctively. I can give it back." "You can keep it," Sarah said, cold as ice. "It's a reminder of what you cost. You didn't care about the truth when I was poor. You didn't care about women sticking together when you were driving his Mercedes and splashing water on me at the bus stop this morning. You only care now because the checkbook has changed hands." "That's not true," Jessica cried. "Your Honor." Sarah turned to Judge Holloway. "She is lying. She isn't a victim. She was his partner in everything. Please just make it stop. I just want my children and I want to go home." Judge Holloway looked at the three of them. He had seen enough bad marriages to last a lifetime. But the naked greed on display from the defense table was rare even for him. "Mr. Sterling," Holloway said, "you are excused. I don't blame you for this circus." Sterling didn't hesitate. "Thank you, Your Honor." He grabbed his briefcase and walked out of the courtroom without even looking back at David. David was now truly alone. "David Miller," Holloway boomed. "Stand up." David stood leaning heavily on the table. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "I am granting full legal and physical custody of Leo and Sam Miller to their mother, Sarah Miller." Holloway ruled, "You are to have no contact with them until you complete a psychological evaluation and a parenting course. Furthermore, given the flight risk you pose and the fraud you have committed in my courtroom," Holloway signaled to the bailiff. "Deputies, please take Mr. Miller into custody. I am holding him in contempt of court for perjury and remanding him to the county jail pending a hearing on the fraud charges regarding the Vance Trust." "No," David shouted as the bailiff grabbed his arms. "You can't do this. I'm a CEO. I have a meeting at noon. Sarah, tell them Sarah." Sarah didn't look at him. She looked down at her twins. Leo was awake, looking up at her with big blue eyes. "And Ms. Banks?" Holloway asked. Jessica froze. She was halfway to the door, trying to sneak out. "Yes, Your Honor." "Don't leave town," Holloway warned. "The district attorney will likely want to speak with you regarding your role as a secondary beneficiary on that Cayman Island account. If you received any stolen funds, you will be facing charges as an accomplice." Jessica's face crumbled. She looked at Sarah one last time, a look of pure, unfiltered jealousy before she burst into tears and ran out of the courtroom. David was dragged out the side door, his cuffs clanking, shouting obscenities. Then the room was quiet again. Sarah stood there, the adrenaline fading, leaving her trembling. She had won. She had the boys. She was safe. "Mrs. Miller," Judge Halloway said gently. Sarah looked up. The judge was smiling a rare, genuine smile. "The clerk has the details for the trustee handling your grandfather's estate. It seems Archibald Vance wanted to make sure you were taken care of. He was a wise man." "Thank you, Your Honor," Sarah whispered. "Go take care of those boys. And buy yourself a car. A safe one." Sarah walked out of the courtroom. The rain had stopped. But the story wasn't over. Because money changes things. And while David was gone, the sharks smell blood in the water. Sarah Miller was about to find out that having $24 million puts a target on your back that is much bigger than a divorce settlement. As she stepped out of the courthouse, blinking in the sudden sunlight, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. It wasn't David. It wasn't Jessica. It was a man Sarah hadn't seen in 10 years. A man who was supposed to be in prison. "Hello, Sarah," the man said, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I heard you came into some money. We need to talk about Dad." The heavy oak doors of the King County Superior Court swung shut behind Sarah, muffling the chaotic hum of the legal machinery that had just chewed up her ex-husband and spit him out in handcuffs. Stepping onto the sidewalk, Sarah felt the physical change in the atmosphere. The torrential Seattle downpour that had soaked her thrift store coat earlier that morning had finally broken. The clouds were parting jagged fissures of blue sky, peeking through the grey slate, allowing weak, watery shafts of sunlight to hit the wet pavement. The city smelled of ozone exhaust and wet concrete, a smell that for the first time in years didn't make Sarah feel nauseous. It smelled like a clean slate. She took a deep breath, gripping the rubber handle of the double stroller. Her knuckles were still white, a lingering reflex from the hour-long adrenaline spike of the trial. She looked down at the twins. Leo was asleep, his small fist curled against his cheek, while Sam was batting at a plastic toy hanging from the canopy. They had no idea that their net worth had just jumped by 8 figures. They had no idea their father was currently being fingerprinted. They just knew their mother was there. "We did it," Sarah whispered the words, feeling foreign on her tongue. "We actually did it." She began to walk toward the bus stop, her old habits dying hard. She stopped after 3 steps. "Wait," she thought. "I don't have to take the bus. I can call a cab. I can call a limousine if I want to." The realization was dizzying. A sudden vertigo brought on by the abrupt shift in her reality. Before she could reach for her phone, a vehicle screeched to a halt at the curb, cutting off her path. It was a black SUV, older model with tinted windows and a rusted dent on the rear fender. It wasn't the sleek corporate transport of a law firm. It looked predatory. The engine idled with a rough chugging sound, spewing a cloud of dark exhaust that drifted over the stroller. Sarah's instinct was instant primal fear. She yanked the stroller back, placing her body between the car and her children. David's friends, she thought. Reporters. The passenger window rolled down with a mechanical grind. The face that stared out at her wasn't a stranger. It was a face she had seen in her nightmares for a decade. It was a face that mirrored her own, but twisted by years of vice and bitterness. It was Lucas. Lucas Vance was her half-brother, the dark secret of the family tree. He was the reason Sarah had left home at 18. He was a gambler, a liar, and a thief who had stolen their mother's wedding ring to pay a bookie in Reno. The last she had heard, he was serving a 5-year sentence in a Nevada federal penitentiary for wire fraud. "Hello, Sarah," Lucas said. His voice was like gravel in a blender, rough, scratching, and terrifyingly familiar. He opened the door and stepped out. He was thinner than she remembered his skin, sallow and grey, wearing a cheap leather jacket that looked 2 sizes too big and smelled powerfully of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. He didn't look like a brother. He looked like a wolf that had caught the scent of blood. "Lucas." Sarah's voice caught in her throat. She took another step back, her heels catching on the uneven pavement. You're supposed to be in jail." "Good behavior, sis." Lucas grinned, a jagged expression that didn't reach his dead, shark-like eyes. He leaned against the doorframe of the SUV, lighting a cigarette with a trembling hand. "Amazing what the system will do when they need to clear out beds. And imagine my surprise when I get out, check the family news, and hear that our dear departed Granddaddy Vance left a fortune." He took a drag of the cigarette and flicked the ash toward the stroller. "A fortune that rightfully belongs to the firstborn son. Don't you think?" Lucas continued, his voice dropping an octave. "I mean, technically, I'm the heir. You were just the afterthought." "He disowned you, Lucas," Sarah said. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she forced her feet to stay planted. "He wrote you out of the will 10 years ago, when you cleared out his savings account. He left it to me because he knew I would protect it. He knew what you were." "Yeah, well, what I am is broke." Lucas's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, hard stare. He took a step toward her, encroaching on her personal space. "And reason doesn't pay my debts. I owe some very bad people in Vegas, Sarah. And looking at you, you look like you just hit the jackpot." He glanced at the courthouse doors, then back at her. "I don't want to make a scene," Lucas said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm a reasonable guy. Just transfer $5 million to my account, today. Consider it a finder's fee for staying away from you and these cute little nephews of mine." He looked at the twins. It was a look of assessment, calculating their value as leverage. It was a threat. A clear, direct, violent threat. In the past, Sarah would have crumbled. The old Sarah, the one who apologized to David for breathing too loud, the one who let people walk all over her to keep the peace, would have offered him money just to make him leave. She would have begged. She would have cried. But that Sarah had died in courtroom 4B about 20 minutes ago. Something hot and fierce ignited in her chest. It was the same fire that had allowed her to stand up to a shark lawyer and a narcissist husband. She looked at Lucas, really looked at him, and she didn't see a monster anymore. She saw a pathetic, desperate man in a cheap jacket. He was just another bully, just like David, just like Jessica. And she was done with bullies. "No," Sarah said. The word was quiet, but it had the weight of an anchor. Lucas blinked, caught off guard. He laughed, a nervous hacking sound. "Excuse me, I don't think you heard me. I said I know where you live. I said, I heard you." Sarah interrupted, her voice rising clear and steady. "I said, no, you aren't getting $5 million. You aren't getting $5. You are a ghost, Lucas. Go back to being dead to me." She reached into her battered tote bag. Lucas flinched, his eyes darting to her hand, expecting a weapon. When she pulled out her cracked smartphone, his face twisted into a snarl. "You think you can call the cops before I take that 40 stroller?" Lucas sneered, lunging forward, his hand reaching for her arm. "I can snap your wrist before you dial 911. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She simply held the phone up, not dialing, but pointing. "I don't need to call them," Sarah said, her voice ice cold. "They're already here." Lucas froze. He followed her gaze, spinning around, to look toward the courthouse entrance. Standing 15 feet away, watching the scene with hands resting on their utility belts, were 2 uniformed King County Sheriff's deputies. They were large men, imposing and alert. They had just finished escorting David to the transport van and had paused on the steps, their attention drawn by the aggressive man harassing the woman with the stroller. One of the deputies, a sergeant with a thick mustache, began to walk down the steps. His eyes locked on Lucas. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" the deputy called out, his voice booming over the street noise. The color drained from Lucas's face so fast it looked like a magic trick. He looked at the deputies, then back at Sarah. He saw the defiance in her posture. He saw the utter lack of fear in her eyes. He realized too late that he had miscalculated everything. This wasn't the little sister he used to push around. This was a woman who had just taken down a titan, and she wasn't afraid of a street thug. "Family dispute," Lucas muttered, backing away. His hands raised in a universal gesture of surrender. Just saying hello to my sister. Catching up." "I have a restraining order against him from 2018. Sarah lied smoothly. It wasn't true the order had expired years ago, but she knew Lucas wouldn't know the difference, and she knew the deputies wouldn't check the paperwork before acting. "He is harassing me and threatening my children." "Sir, step away from the lady," the deputy ordered, his hand unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. "Now." Lucas scowled, a look of pure, impotent venom. He spat on the ground near Sarah's feet, a final, petty act of defiance. "This isn't over, Sarah," he hissed, backing toward his SUV. "Money like that, it brings wolves. You can't fight us all." "Let them come," Sarah said, staring him down, her voice ringing with a power she had never felt before. "I'm done running, and I'm done feeding the wolves." Lucas scrambled back into his SUV, slamming the door. He peeled away from the curb tires, screeching, running a red light in his haste to escape the approaching deputies. The deputy reached Sarah just as the black SUV disappeared around the corner. "You okay, Mom? Do you want to file a report?" Sarah exhaled, her shoulders finally dropping. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a pleasant buzz in her fingertips. "I am now, officer. Thank you. He won't be back." She looked down at Leo and Sam. They were wide awake, watching the world with curiosity, completely unharmed. Just then, a sleek silver sedan, a luxury model that whispered money, pulled up to the exact spot Lucas had just vacated. The driver's side door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was in her 50s, elegant, wearing a tailored blazer and holding a file folder. She radiated competence and safety. "Mrs. Miller," the woman asked, her voice warm and professional. "I'm Eleanor Vance. I'm the executor of your grandfather's trust. Judge Halloway called me." Sarah blinked. "Eleanor, I apologize for the delay," Eleanor said, glancing at the skid marks left by Lucas's SUV. "Traffic was dreadful. I'm here to take you to the bank to finalize the transfer. And then I believe to a dealership the judge mentioned something about you needing a safe car." Sarah looked at the rusted bus stop sign, then at the luxury sedan, and finally at the kind woman offering her a hand. A laugh bubbled up in her chest, a genuine, incredulous sound of joy. "Yes," Sarah smiled, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "2 car seats, actually. The safest ones money can buy. And Eleanor." "Yes, my dear. Can we stop for ice cream first? I promised the boys a treat. And I think I deserve one too." Eleanor's smile widened, crinkling the corners of her eyes. She opened the back door of the sedan. "I know the perfect place. Chocolate or vanilla?" "Both," Sarah said, lifting the first carrier. "Definitely both." 6 months later. The sun began its slow golden descent behind the jagged silhouette of the Cascade Mountains, casting long violet shadows across the sprawling acreage of the ranch. The air here was different than it was in the city. It didn't smell of exhaust, wet concrete, and desperation. It smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and the sweet, grassy scent of alfalfa. Sarah stood on the wraparound porch of the main farmhouse, a steaming mug of chamomile tea, warming her hands against the evening chill. She leaned against the rough-hewn cedar railing, her eyes scanning the property that now bore her family name. The Vance Creek Ranch was more than just real estate. It was a fortress of peace. It was 2 hours from Seattle, but it might as well have been on another planet. Down by the white-fenced paddock, the scene was picture-perfect. A gentle dappled grey pony named Buster was being led in a slow circle by a professional trainer. Perched on Buster's back were 2 small figures bundled in fleece jackets. Leo and Sam were giggling, the sound drifting up the hill like wind chimes. They weren't clutching their mother in fear or crying from hunger. They were gripping the pony's mane with chubby, confident hands, living a childhood that Sarah had once thought was impossible to give them. Sarah took a sip of tea, closing her eyes for a moment. For the first few weeks after moving here, she had flinched at every sound. The crunch of gravel under a delivery truck's tires would send her heart racing, terrified it was a process server or David coming to take it all back. But the silence of the ranch had slowly worked its magic, knitting her frayed nerves back together. A sudden harsh vibration against the wooden railing shattered the moment. Sarah's eyes snapped open. Her phone, resting on the banister, was buzzing angrily. The screen lit up, illuminating the darkening porch with a stark, artificial light. Caller ID, King County Correctional Facility. It was him. Again. David had been calling every Friday at this exact time. It was his allotted phone time. In the beginning, she had answered, fueled by a need to hear his defeat. But now she just watched the screen. She didn't answer, but she didn't decline it either. She let it ring, knowing that on the other end of the line, in a cold concrete room, smelling of bleach and sweat, David was gripping the receiver, listening to the hollow echo of a life he had thrown away. The ringing stopped. A moment later, the new voicemail notification appeared. Against her better judgment, Sarah tapped the transcription button. She didn't want to hear his voice, that smooth, manipulative baritone that had once controlled her every move, but she needed to read the words. She needed the reminder. The text scrolled across her screen. "Sarah, pick up. It's David. Look, I know you're there. My lawyer says you're blocking the appeals. You can't do this. It's inhumane. The heating in this block is broken, Sarah. I'm freezing. I'm a CEO, for God's sake. I shouldn't be in with these animals. I need you to deposit money for my commissary account. Just $500. That's nothing to you now. You owe me that much for the years I supported you. Please, I'm begging you. Don't ignore me. I still love you, Sarah." "Doesn't that matter?" Sarah stared at the words. "I'm a CEO. Even now, facing 15 years for wire fraud, embezzlement, and perjury, He was clinging to the title like a lifeline. He hadn't learned a thing. He was still the same narcissist who believed the world owed him comfort even after he had tried to leave his own children destitute. "I don't owe you a damn thing," she whispered to the empty air. She pressed delete. The message vanished, erased as easily as he had tried to erase her from their bank accounts. She turned away from the phone, her mood darkening slightly. She needed a distraction. She picked up her tablet from the patio table and sat down on the swinging bench. She opened the local news app, a habit she had formed during the trial to keep track of the public fallout. The algorithm, knowing her history, had already pushed a story to the top of her feed. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. The headline was stark and humiliating: fallen socialite, former lifestyle influencer, arrested in Bellevue boutique theft. Below it was a mugshot. It was Jessica Banks. But it wasn't the Jessica of 6 months ago. The glossy, perfectly blown-out blonde hair was limp and showing dark, inch-long roots. Her skin, once glowing with expensive facials, looked sallow and tired under the harsh fluorescent booking lights. Her eyes, usually narrowed in a smug glare, were wide and red-rimmed, filled with the terrified realization of rock bottom. Sarah tapped on the article, her fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer surreality of it. Jessica Banks, 24. Was apprehended by security at the Bravon shopping centre yesterday afternoon after attempting to leave a luxury retailer with a designer handbag concealed under her coat. Banks, who was recently implicated in the high-profile Miller divorce fraud scandal, reportedly made a scene when confronted, screaming that she was a celebrity and that the item was a gift. Banks, whose assets were seized during the federal investigation into her former partner, David Miller, has been unable to secure employment since the scandal broke. Witnesses stated she appeared disoriented and was shouting about a nursery in the penthouse as police led her away in handcuffs. Sarah set the tablet down, a heavy feeling settling in her chest. It wasn't pity she couldn't afford, pity for the woman who had laughed at her children's poverty, but it was a profound sense of waste. Jessica had had youth, beauty, and freedom. She had thrown it all away for a gamble on a man who viewed her as nothing more than an accessory. Jessica had wanted the life Sarah had. She had wanted the money, the status, the Miller empire. Now she had the only part of the Miller empire that was real, the ruin. "Mama, Mama, look!" The shout broke through Sarah's thoughts. She looked up to see the gate to the paddock opening. Martha, the boy's nanny, was walking up the path, holding a hand on each side. Martha was a stout, kind-faced woman in her 60s who baked cookies from scratch and actually sang to the boys, unlike the British expert David had once hired, who treated them like biology experiments. Leo and Sam were covered in a layer of honest dirt. Their cheeks were flushed pink from the wind, and their eyes were bright with excitement. "We rode the horse," Sam shouted, stumbling up the porch steps, his legs still wobbly from the ride. "Big horse. It was a pony, Sam," Leo corrected him seriously, mimicking the trainer. "A pony." Sarah felt the darkness of the phone call and the mugshot evaporate instantly. She dropped to her knees on the porch, opening her arms wide. The twins collided with her, a tangle of small limbs, fleece jackets, and the smell of fresh air. "Did you give Buster a carrot?" Sarah asked, burying her face in Sam's neck, listening to his squeal of delight. "2 carrots," Leo announced proudly, holding up 2 dirty fingers. He ate them crunch, crunch. Martha smiled from the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "They were wonderful, Mrs. Miller. Natural riders, both of them. I've got a pot roast in the oven, and the bath is drawn. Shall we get them cleaned up?" "In a minute, Martha," Sarah said, holding her sons tighter. Just 1 more minute. She looked over the tops of their heads, out toward the horizon. The sun had finally dipped below the mountains, leaving a streak of fire across the sky. The ranch lights were flickering on, warm and inviting against the twilight. Her brother Lucas was back in jail, caught trying to run a scam in Nevada. David was in a cell begging for commissary money. Jessica was facing charges for stealing a bag she used to be able to buy with a swipe of a card. They were all trapped in the prisons they had built for themselves. But here on this porch, there were no Yalant. There was no fear. There was only the sound of her children breathing the smell of the pine trees and the overwhelming, beautiful weight of freedom. Sarah Miller stood up, picking up Sam, while Leo grabbed her hand. She turned her back on the phone, on the news, and on the past. "Come on, boys," she said, her voice steady and strong. "Let's go home." And that is how Sarah Miller turned her tragedy into a triumph. She walked into that courtroom with nothing but the truth, and she walked out with a new life. David and Jessica thought they held all the cards, but they forgot that karma has a way of stacking the deck when you least expect it. It goes to show that no matter how dark it gets, the truth always has a way of coming into the light. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have given David the money for his commissary, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a lottery winner whose husband tried to hide the ticket. You won't want to miss that. Thanks for watching and see you next time.